couple of days, for example. That cloud bringing some heavy showers late afternoon, early evening through northern England, the Midlands, Wales. But those showers, as they push southeastwards, tend to peter out and, well, by dawn on Thursday, looks like clear skies once again for many places. As a result, in the north in particular, it's going to be a chilly start to the day. Temperatures in some spots down below freezing. But a bright start for much of Scotland, northern England, the Midlands, Wales. I think some lingering cloud there in the east of England, but that also clears by around lunchtime. However, by this stage, outbreaks of rain are returning to the southwest. And those spells of rain will move across much of the country during the second half of Thursday. Windy and showery on Friday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Tonight on Farage, we discuss and debate, will the lights go out this winter? How much are electric cars going to cost you? Are Nigerians abusing the legal immigration system? That and much, much else, including China. How much of a threat are they? The boss at GCHQ thinks perhaps a very big one. And then joining us on Talking Pints, author James Erith. It's going to be a very busy hour, but before all of that, let's get the news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. The King's coronation will be held on May the 6th next year, according to Buckingham Palace. The ceremony will take place in Westminster Abbey, 8 months after the monarch's accession and the death of Queen Elizabeth. May the 6th is also the birthday of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's son, Archie, who will be turning 4 on the same day. More than 2,000 specially invited guests are set to fill the Abbey to witness the historic event. In other news today, the Chancellor of the Exchequer says he remains committed to measures set out in his recent mini-budget, despite further intervention from the Bank of England. The central bank was busy buying more government debt today, having warned of a further risk to the UK's financial stability. Facing questions in the Commons, Kwasi Kwarteng described the current package of support for households and businesses as strong. He also refused calls from his own party to streamline spending on HS2 and Quangos and instead lower taxes for small businesses.
Consider the measures we've already introduced. National insurance hikes have been reversed, corporation tax rise has been scrapped, and the annual investment allowance remains at £1 million. These are measures which small businesses up and down the land have been very, very appreciative of.
Well, a leading economic think tank estimates that the Chancellor has to cut £60 billion worth of spending if he wants to convince investors that he can get the public finances back under control. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says the shortfall is a consequence of measures announced since Liz Truss became Prime Minister. Deputy Prime Minister Therese Coffey refused to reveal if the government plans to cut spending. The Prime Minister says G7 leaders will not waver in their resolve to help Ukraine achieve peace. The comment comes after President Zelensky joined Liz Truss and other heads of state to discuss the recent spate of Russian attacks. Ukrainian president has called on the leaders to give Ukraine enough air defence capability to stop Russia. In a statement, the leaders condemned Moscow for targeting civilians and said it constituted a war crime. The Scottish Government has told the Supreme Court it's in the public interest to resolve the issue of whether or not Holyrood can hold a second referendum on the Scottish independence. Scotland's top law officer put forward the case for a second independence referendum without the support of Westminster. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says she wants to be able to hold the vote in October next year. But the UK government says the bill is at too early a stage for the court to rule on it. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, where it's time for Farage.
Good evening. Well, the breaking news in the last hour is that the King's coronation will take place on May the 6th, 2023, not all that far away. Just a quick thought. I know that King Charles wants a slimmed down coronation, but you know something? The Queen's funeral wasn't slimmed down in any way at all, as millions of people turned up in London and Windsor and elsewhere, and we saw the full pageantry. We saw what we're capable of as a country. I would urge King Charles, don't slim it down too much. We actually thought what happened during that sad period was really rather magnificent. And I tell you something, it wasn't just us, the rest of the world thought it too. Now to my main topic tonight. I woke this morning and looked out. There was frost on the garden shed. The thermostat had automatically kicked in. Yes, the heating bills are beginning for all of us. Ever since I sat first in this chair back in July last year, as GB News launched, I've been worried about energy supply. Not just price, but energy supply. Indeed, for 20 years, I've been questioning the government's energy policy. And I've sat here with some very distinguished guests, and we've said over the last few months there is a very real prospect of the lights going out this winter. Now, I think those of us that have said that have been, as usual, discredited as being alarmist scaremongers. Well, have a look at a few of these headlines that have emerged over the course of the last couple of weeks. Homes face winter power cuts in worst case scenario, says the National Grid. Ofgem warns UK faces significant risk of gas shortages. Europe prepares blackout plans to head off winter energy chaos, and UK blackout plans the government's emergency strategy for winter. Electricity rationing explained in full. So you see, folks, perhaps I wasn't quite as crackers. It's official. We are in a very, very real crisis. We are in danger at a time when we depend upon power and electricity for modern civilization greater than we ever did way back in the 1970s. And that's particularly true with computerization and digitization. We have got ourselves into the most awful mess. I absolutely lay the blame fairly and squarely at every Prime Minister since Tony Blair, and in particular Boris Johnson, who simply ignored all of the warnings. So, the debate tonight is, will the lights go out this winter? Tell me what you think. Farage at gbnews.uk. Well, my co-conspirator in discussing all of this over the course of the last few months is gas consultant and former government energy advisor, Clive Moffat. Clive, you've sat there. You've been the voice of doom, it would appear.
Indeed, yes. We were accused of scaremongering, I think, by the Chancellor, the Coronation. No, it's serious. It's a very serious problem. And I'd just like to put the energy crisis into perspective with the economic crisis that's been talked about as well, obviously. It's very important. Energy is at the heart of the problem for three very simple reasons. The first is that there's been a lot of talk about the 45 billion tax giveaway impact on public sector borrowing. But the cost of the currently designed energy capping announced on the 1st of October will be at least double that. And that is a serious matter.
And could be more.
And it could be more. And it's become more unaffordable with the fall in the value of sterling, which has increased the sterling cost of gas imports, which we're going to be essentially dependent upon during the winter. And that's one reason. The second reason is that now, if we have, as many viewers probably don't understand, is that the grid have responsibility for day-to-day real-time management of power, but they don't have the same responsibility in gas. So if there's a shortage of gas, then the only option they have available is a gas deficit warning, which normally precedes an emergency shutdown by about 24 hours, probably sometimes less.
And indeed, Jacob Rees-Mogg has said that as and when the blackouts come, if they come, hospitals will be prioritised. Yeah. But ordinary households would have, what, 2 or 3 hours a day without any energy?
The priorities are domestic heating must be kept on.
OK.
Essential services. Mm-hmm. And power generators for obvious reasons, because we're 60% dependent on gas power generation.
Are you saying that industry would pay the price of this?
Industry will pay the price. It's been known for years that this is every DNO, a district national operator, regional operators and grid have lists of companies. When it comes to a GDW, gas deficit warning, leads to an emergency, they immediately contact those companies and say, we're going to turn you off. Those companies may have no longer than a few hours to adjust to that. Now, my fear is that if the gas supply situation is not managed properly by Ofgem and the grid, then we're in danger of there being gas deficit emergency, which would in fact lead to swathes of industry being out of action. The impact on output and employment would be significant. And of course, it would have ramifications in terms of us rolling into even more longer period of stagflation and higher interest rates. Mm. And the third reason is linked to that, is that if that were to happen, then the prospect that this government is holding out that we are going to grow out of this crisis and fund government borrowing through higher revenues from economic growth is not going to happen. So at the heart of the discussion about bond prices today is an energy crisis, and it needs to be addressed. There are 4 things I would like, if Jacob Rees-Mogg was here with us tonight, I would say to him, there are 4 things I would like you to do before breakfast.
So these are the positives. I mean, this is the way that we can alleviate...
This is minor things that could mitigate the damage. Yeah. The first one is to give CEO at Centrica a ring and say, how are you getting on with injecting gas into the Rough storage facility, which apparently is taking place. But it needs to be fully completed if it's to have any impact in the winter.
Just for viewers and listeners, this was our major gas storage site.
Which they closed 4 years ago.
Which they closed, yeah.
Yes. Wrongly.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. So I would say, well, and also say to Centrica, what revenue support do you need to make it full in the next 2 or 3 months? Give us 10 more days of respite, and we only have 2 days of aggregate, demand support on storage compared to 25% on average demand across Europe.
In Germany and Poland, and
even longer. Yeah. But the point is that is one thing I would do. The second thing I would do is say to him, bring in the CEOs of Grid and Ofgem and say, what steps? Be please specific. What steps have you taken to ensure that major gas users can maybe, possibly with some incentive, be prepared to voluntarily curtail in advance, so that when you're sitting there in front of your computer and you see a gas shortage emerging, you can say, oh, but that's okay, we've got a bit of storage, and now we've got a bit of self-curtailment we can handle. Yeah. That may cost money. Yeah. We need to do it. Yeah. The third thing, I think, is to look at the costs of the capping scheme. It is unaffordable. It needs to be adjusted, and the best way of doing it is to copy what the Germans have done. The Germans have put in 200 billion for caps for consumers on energy. What they have done, though, is put a volume qualifying restraint on it. So that effectively, if you consume above a certain number of units of electricity or gas, the subsidy will not apply, the cap won't apply. So it acts as an incentive to reduce demand.
To reduce fuel consumption.
Correct.
Yeah.
So...
Okay, and lastly...
that's something we could do quite, which would be... And the fourth thing is, I mean, I don't understand this, and nobody I spoke to, and I've been around a while in the industry, could understand why Jacob Rees-Mogg was carrying around a file which had in it the details of the launch of a national program for helping people to understand some practical issues that they could do to curtail demand.
And the government didn't want to campaign?
No, and it's a no-brainer because, quite frankly, even if there was a good response collectively across in the population, most economists like myself would predict that perhaps at least 5% reduction in aggregate consumption could be achieved in the next 3 to 4 months, which could have a serious positive impact on bills and reduce the risk of energy rationing.
Well,
which is very important.
I have to say, you're not just the voice of doom. You're putting forward some positive proposals. Let's hope the government listen. And what a thought, if we have a big anticyclone across Britain in February, the lights will go out. Quite extraordinary. Well, on the same theme, this government, particularly the Johnson government, desperately keen to go green. In fact, I even nicknamed the party the Richmond Greens. Very, very rich people who wanted us to take all sorts of measures like expensive heat pumps. Oh, and of course, most important of all, we've got to get rid. We must stop petrol and diesel cars because they are evil. They will end human existence on this planet. And so from 2030, we're told, there will be no more production, no more sales of diesel and petrol cars. Now, look, I thought the whole thing was a complete and absolute joke. I thought it was unachievable, as so many government targets are. What I hadn't, I must admit, hoist on board at all was what the astonishing cost of all of this might be. Oh, when I say cost, I mean cost to you. Yes, cost to you in your households. Well, overnight, there is a CEBR report and survey out on it, and it's sanctioned and backed by the Fair Fuel campaign, the founder of which, of course, who's an old friend of this programme, is Howard Cox. Howard, electric cars. I mean, we're going to save the planet. It's going to be great.
I think there's a bit of a tug in your cheek there, as you said that.
Well, but this is how it was all presented to us.
Absolutely.
It was all going to be very, very easy and no problem. What do we learn from this report?
Well, one of the things is we've learned is the government haven't done a cost-benefit analysis of this policy, which is basically not enshrined in a law yet. So we can still stop this thing, and that's what I'm calling on your viewers to actually sign up to Fairfield UK and help us do this. But fundamentally, what we're looking at is, imagine if you were a minister and I was one of your underlings. I came to you and said, look, I've got this great idea. We can save 80 billion or we can generate 80 billion of environmental savings. But, sorry, it's going to cost us 400 billion, 5 times the cost of the benefits.
And why is it going to cost 400 billion?
Well, fundamentally, the cost of the cars themselves, the actual grid, all sorts of things. The CEBR, who are much brainier than me as economists, they have come up with a list of things, and I asked them a long time ago, please, could you do something about this? And the Alliance of British Drivers and the Motorcycle Action Group and myself come together and simply asked the question of an independent, very well-respected economic group and asked them, really, what does this mean to Mrs Joe Bloggs and manufacturers? And fundamentally, 5 times. Now,
so that statistic, if it's right...
Oh, it's very right.
...would be £1,000 extra cost per household, that's you folks, per household for every year between now and 2050.
Yeah, all the way to net zero. That's what you've got to do. No matter what happens, you're being asked to pay £1,000.
How can the government make big announcements like this without having done a cost-benefit analysis?
Well, this is the whole point. We just don't understand it whatsoever. And believe it or not, they responded to this report today, the DFT, saying that we're not taking into account environmental issues and the benefits of electric vehicles. We're using their data in this report. It's their own data. And that's what we're saying to them.
And if you have an electric car now, I've noticed that you go to charging points, you know, on motorway service stations, whatever it is. The cost now of charging an electric vehicle has risen hugely, hasn't it?
Well, public charging points are about the same as running a diesel or petrol car now, about 19 to 20p per mile. It's the same for both. And remember this, electric vehicles don't pay any tax yet.
No, and the government would lose revenue, of course, on the huge amounts of tax it charges.
About £2.8 billion a year.
So how do the government recoup this money?
Well, they're going to tax us and probably on road charging, all those sorts of things. They haven't got a clue, Nigel. They're in a situation whereby they're putting their finger up to the air and saying, we're looking green, we're looking very virtual signalling, angelic. And
so, Howard Cox, you know, it's clear to me that we can't actually produce the electricity that's needed for these cars, and it'll take us a very, very long time to do so. The government have set this target. It's not yet in law, which is a very important fundamental point. But, of course, everybody over there in Westminster, and, by the way, all these criticisms of the Conservatives, please don't think, folks, that I think Labour's any better, because it jolly well isn't, because they're completely on board with all of this. What, in practical terms, can be done now by ordinary folk at home?
Well, simply, we've got to lobby and prove to them. We've got this incredible evidence to show it's going to cost the economy approaching over £1 trillion to actually go green by removing, and it's part of their net zero policy. It's their journey to looking green and virtuous. And what we've got to do is say, get realistic about this sort of thing. We're in a cost of living crisis. What we need to do right now is actually stop the 2030 and scrap the 2030 ban, and that's what we're asking.
There are some MPs coming out: Tories, Craig McKinley, Carl McCartney, John Webwood, Labour MP Graham Stringer. But I only find 4 MPs out of 651.
There are a lot more, Nigel. It's just
are there?
Yes, I've got a lot more, but I couldn't get much more on the actual press
So when will they
release.
break cover?
Well, we're working on that now. I would say they'll be breaking cover in the next 2 or 3 months.
Complete and utter madness. Howard Cox, as ever, thank you for joining us. And look, you know, if you can show me that we can cut emissions, that we can do so without huge taxpayer subsidy, that we can do so fairly, evenly, then I'm all for it. But none of this stuff has been fully thought through. And the fact these crazy proposals are put forward by governments without any cost-benefit analysis says to me, frankly, folks, we're led by idiots. In a moment, we'll discuss how big a threat is China to our security. The boss of GCHQ has been talking about this. We'll also talk about legal immigration into Britain, and are the Nigerians operating a bit of a scam? All of that in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
So, will the lights go out this winter? There's a very strong possibility, maybe probability that they will. Some of your thoughts on that debate that I had with Clive Moffat earlier. One viewer says, will the gas go off? That's a most likely scenario. Another says, the lights will go out all over the place as people go to bed early to save on their heating bill. Who knows? Maybe a population explosion coming at some point, not too long after that. I don't know. I get Neil telling me, yes, but only for Liz Truss's government. Was suggested to me today that maybe it's the government that should go to Rwanda, but hey. And another viewer says, the green agenda, net zero rubbish, will return to the dark ages and absolutely obliterate our economy. I have to say, I do feel with all of this, we may well be heading back to pre-industrial revolution times. But hey, that's what the Greens want. They want us all to live in caves and never go on foreign holidays ever, ever again. Now, to be serious for a moment. For most of the recent decades, the bosses of our top security services rarely broke cover. In fact, we didn't even know what their names were. But Sir Jeremy Fleming, who is boss of GCHQ, gave a big speech in London today warning about China. Let's listen to a few of the words that he uttered.
We and our like-minded allies see technology as a way to enable greater freedoms, greater prosperity, greater global collaboration, and yes, fair competition. But the Chinese leadership's approach is to also see it as a tool to gain advantage through control of their markets, of those in their sphere of influence, and of course, of their own citizens. And in an increasingly complex and interconnected world, we see this as a major risk to our future security and prosperity. And without the collective action of like-minded allies, the divergent values of the Chinese state, we believe, will be exported through technology.
Well, that was Sir Jeremy Fleming, boss of GCHQ, and he couldn't really, could he, have been clearer in the warnings that he gave us. All of which makes me wonder why perhaps he's taken time to say it, but actually why government appears to have taken this in the completely wrong direction. Well, joining me is veteran Conservative Member of Parliament for Halton, Price and Houghton, David Davis. David, it was your party, was it not? It was George Osborne, it was David Cameron, it was Boris Johnson declaring himself the great Sinophile, and we've allowed Huawei into our telecommunications systems. We've also allowed Chinese manufactured spy cameras to be on our smart motorways and elsewhere. The Conservative Party have taken us into this. Now we're being told by the boss of one of our biggest security agencies that this is a dangerous thing to have done. Is there any admission within your party that they've actually got this wrong?
I mean, to be fair, I mean, a lot of us, I mean, Ian Duncan-Smith, me and others objected to the Huawei involvement in 5G. Yes. And in fact, it's been stopped. I mean, but, you know, but for,
but hang on, Huawei won't be out of this until 2027. I mean...
Quite right, because they've been in since the beginning. I mean, and it's not just Tory governments, it's all governments, I'm afraid. And you're right. I mean, I think Cameron and Osborne's government was particularly kowtowing, is probably the right word, to the Chinese government, and all of us, frankly, have sort of taken for granted all the cheap goods that come out of China, and with it our dependency on China, whether, as you say, it's Huawei phones or Hikvision TV cameras or video cameras and so on. And of course, we've not thought through the consequences for our national security, and they are enormous. I'm really pleased that the head of GCHQ has come out and said that. It's frankly, even from them, it's a bit late. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, the previous head of MI6 saying that he thought they'd probably dropped the ball both on Russia and China for an understandable reason. They're trying to focus on terrorism, but they didn't keep an eye on the main target. And these countries, well, let's be blunt, but they're our enemies much of the time. They have different standards, different beliefs. They want their own domination. We should never underestimate. China's invested around the world in resources, and it's inserted itself into our economy from everything, as you say, from telephones to from nuclear power stations.
And it's also busy picking away at the Commonwealth, whether it's Barbados or the Solomon Islands. You can see what the game is. David, look, terrible mistakes have been made, right? I agree with that. I get that. GCHQ get that. And you're right, we're very dependent on cheap Chinese goods. How do we get how do we reduce that security risk that China poses to us? And secondly, and a much more difficult question, how do we reduce our economic dependence on China?
Well, in a sense, it's almost the same question as you've been talking about earlier with energy dependency. We have to take a whole new view of global free trade. I mean, global free trade has been the greatest thing on some measure in the history of the world. Last 30-odd years, 1.5 billion people have come out of absolute poverty, many of them in China, of course. But so it's great from that point of view, but we've got to say to ourselves, OK, we're the government, which bits of our global free trade are critical to our ongoing economic development, our ongoing operation, our ongoing freedom? And that will vary from gas supplies, where we should be looking for our own, to electronics, where we should be looking to alternatives to China, maybe Taiwan, maybe somewhere else, maybe somewhere here. We should be thinking very hard about how much, and to be fair, recent governments have thought about this, how much we should allow other countries like China to take economic interests in Britain, controlling interests in electronics and other countries. We need a whole new philosophy of free trade.
Are we going to get it?
Oh, I think what's happening, people like you are raising the flag, and people like me are having to respond and say, we must think through this. You know, I'm a free trader. I'm a liberal free trader. But I recognise that there are limits to free trade, because if you don't take limits to free trade, there's limits to your freedom.
I agree with that. Final quick thought. It's very interesting. So Jeremy also said that digital currencies operated by central banks, digital currencies will be a key tool for monitoring citizens' behaviour. He was warning against central bank digital currencies. Rishi Sunak was a great fan of them, wasn't he?
I know. And a blockchain is which is required in those currencies, gives a unique identifier to basically every unit of currency that travels. But, you know, there's more to it than this, even. I mean, the government, GCHQ included, have been wanting us to give up encryption of our own transmissions. There are 1,000 things we have to think about the way we run society, including cryptocurrencies, to make sure that we don't give our individual freedoms rights to foreign nations.
I know you're going to fight it. You always do, David Davis. When it comes to individual liberty, often to the dislike of your own party leadership.
Sometimes.
Which we rather like on this programme. David Davis, thank you very much indeed. Now, of course, I've been banging on, haven't I, about illegal immigration across the Channel. Another 539 that crossed yesterday. Hundreds more again today, and it will go on and on. But tonight I want to talk a little bit about legal immigration, because it turns out that through the student visa programme, the number of Nigerian students who've then been able to bring a dependent relative in this country runs at about 1 for 1. You know, 34,000 Nigerians given student visas and 32,000 dependents coming in their wake. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment there's anything illegal about this, but when you think that a total of 1.1 million visas of various kinds were given out last year, you begin to understand why the British population has risen by 10 million since the year 2000, and 85% of that is due to immigration. Now, no one's suggesting that there aren't some great people coming into this country, because there are some great people coming into this country, but a rise of 10 million, it's completely out of control. Well, joining me is somebody of Nigerian descent. He's a regular on GB News. Hi. And Dr. Emeka, you appear on all of our programmes. You are absolutely proud of your Nigerian heritage and your British present, and you're there in the health service, and you're doing great stuff, and that's great, and we love that. But when you look at these numbers, I mean, frankly, if every single person that comes from Nigeria as a student is then allowed to bring a dependent relative, it's a bit of a joke, isn't it?
I wouldn't say that. I think you have to understand where these people are coming from. Imagine leaving your country, your home country, your whole family. You're coming to a new country in, a search of better education, better jobs, a better lifestyle. You can't just leave everyone there. You also want to bring people in there so they can also develop in that country as well. And being somebody who was a product of that, because when I came many, many years ago, my dad came as a doctor, as a surgeon, to come work here in the NHS. At that point, myself and my siblings, we were dependents. We were young. We couldn't work. We were just living at the time. We didn't have citizenship. We had to wait and get our British passports. And then we were able to go through the system, and I was able to school here, go to medical school here. My sister was able to school here.
No, you've done very well. You've done incredibly well, and that's terrific. And that's an example.
We've been exactly in that
of how
position.
this can work. What I'm saying
when
to
it
you,
works.
what I'm saying to you is one of the, there you are working for the NHS. One of the reasons we've got a 6.7 million waiting list is that our population has exploded totally out of control. We don't actually have the health service, the schools, the roads to cope with the population rising like this.
It's true, but then when you think of what these students are studying and what they're contributing to in society, then it makes it seem a little bit more logical. Because if you think about the NHS, around 15% of the NHS are people who don't identify as British. And that's not to count people like myself who have British citizenship, a British passport, but I'm also dual nationality because I'm Nigerian. So then you think about this, in London, 27% of people working in the NHS aren't British, and Nigerians are the third most populated country from outside the EU that come and actually drive the NHS workforce. So we're saying the poor
countries will strip out your talent, will take away your nurses and doctors. They're probably more needed there, aren't they?
Well, I wouldn't call them poor countries. I call them developing economies. And secondly, these people who come here and study here also have their opportunities to go home and give their talents back. So my plan, obviously, is to do a lot back in my country. I was trained here in the UK. I was fortunate enough to be given the resources to study here and work in the NHS, which is great. And then I've seen how healthcare systems can work, and then I'm trying my best to go back and implement them there too.
You see absolutely no problem with this. Nigerian citizens accounted for 40% overall of all dependents who accompanied foreign students in the 12 months this year. Does it strike you as a bit odd that one country should be 40% of all dependents that come accompanying students?
No, I think it's because of our culture and how we see it. I think we really value it when it's very difficult for a Nigerian who's studying in Nigeria to be able to get a student visa or get a working visa here. And when we do, we want to obviously make the best of it, and that's providing a better life for yourself and your family, and thinking that your family can go through a system with the kids who have grown up here and develop and possibly give back to our country if we can.
Well, never let it be said, we don't allow both sides of the argument on this programme. And you've done a great job, and we love people like you coming here, but I'm just suggesting.
I understand.
There has to be an upper limit somewhere.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you. We'll see you again on GB News very, very soon. Now, a couple of What the Farage moments, and I think they're really quite important ones. The first one is football. Yes, really important this. Sky Sports have just aired an hour-long documentary, and it's called Football's Toughest Opponent. And I wondered, is it violence on the terraces? Is it prejudice? Is it some awful bribery scandal that has taken place as part of the transfer market? No. Believe it or not, it's climate change. And if the temperature rises any more than it does, 25% of all our football pitches will be underwater. They're literally underwater by the year 2050. You simply could not make up some of the rubbish that gets pumped out by Sky News. Now, last night I talked about the 40,000 people who'd lost their jobs in the care sector in this country. I talked about the knock-on effect to the NHS, the fact there are 13,000 people in NHS beds that need to go into care, but there aren't the staff to look after them. Well, overnight, the Skills for Care Foundation have produced a report. It's 153 pages. It says 50,000 jobs were lost last year in the care sector. It backs up the figure that I gave you last night of about 165,000 job vacancies in the care sector at this moment in time. And yet, of the whole 153 pages, there is the tiniest couple of little paragraphs saying that the mandatory vaccination policy might have had some effect. Well, I tell you what, it was 40,000 of that 50,000 that left the care sector last year. And I get it, the hours are long, the pay's not great. And interestingly, when the BBC covered this story this morning at great length, no mention was made of mandatory vaccines. And so I do very much reinforce the call that I made last night that says NHS workers who didn't have the jab were exempted and carried on working. Those 40,000 people in the care sector deserve to have their jobs back, and the country needs it very, very badly indeed. My goodness me, don't we? And how have we got ourselves into this situation where we can't have any proper, open, honest debate? No, if you argue against the mandatory vaccine, somehow you're some sort of, anti-vaxxer, an evil person. This is just a common sense argument. The Together campaign has my complete and absolute backing. In a moment, James Erith is going to join me. He's an author, a polymath, done all sorts of things in life. We're going to find out in a moment what makes a great writer. That'll be Talking Pints in just a minute.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's that time of the day, my favourite time of the day. Yes, it is Talking Pints, and I'm joined by author James Erith. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Very good to see you. Now, you are a bit, I think, of a polymath. You've been a landscaper, you've been a teacher, an estate agent, a researcher, a PA, a journalist. You're a cricket fan, which is great. You've done all these different jobs. Were you not very good at them?
No, I was absolutely hopeless at them. But what it gave me was a wonderful breadth of experiences. And I think, actually, if you want to be a writer, then there's nothing better than getting stuck into all sorts of different things, because you meet all sorts of different people, you go and try different things, and it's a great way of experiencing life.
But did you know, when you were younger, that you wanted to be a writer? Or did you just head off into the world?
I headed off madly into the world, but I kind of knew deep down that there was something there. I really had to. So it got to the point where I had to write a book. I had to write my Eden Chronicles series. It bugged me so much that it wouldn't stop. And then one day I banged my head and set about writing way into the night and early in the morning. And I did it for about 4 months. Ended up with a 500-page book. And it was, my family thought I'd completely gone mad.
Gone crackers.
Completely crackers, yeah.
Because there are literally hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people out there who think they can be writers, who want to produce a book. And huge numbers of people write books, they never get them published. Although these days, of course, you can self-publish. It's much easier to do that. I mean, it is, for most people, wanting to be a writer, I think it ends in failure, doesn't it?
It's difficult. It's really difficult. You've got to have some, you've got to have balls, because you are not going to win. I mean, the first time I did it, I didn't know what I was doing. And you have to get kicked in the teeth a lot, you get rejected a lot, and you're learning all the time. It's a million words, I think, before you start really getting kind of the hang of it.
How do you decide you want to be a writer? how do you decide what the genre is? How do you decide this is the subject that I'm going to go for? How do you make your mind up on that? Or is that the passion?
Well, it's interesting. Eden Chronicles started with just a passion for a kind of fantasy story. I loved the idea of riddles and finding a sort of a journey, a lovely journey, and it's set in Yorkshire and goes on one. Timestamp, my latest book, was actually set off by my father's brilliant comment that 150 years ago, the communication started with a stamp, with a gummy back, and look where it has got us today. And I got thinking about that, that now we're on the verge of putting chips in our head. And in that
come on, we don't want that, do we?
No, we don't. And that's the whole beauty of the book, is it really goes into this, OK, this is where we're going, and this is where we possibly should be.
Now, you obviously like stories, because from what I can see of all these previous jobs that you did, there was one job where you had a bit of success, and this was working, or I think so anyway, working as a journalist. So again, maybe that theme of looking for stories, thinking stories through. Maybe journalists are writers anyway, in a sense, aren't they?
Yeah.
So tell us about your big scoop as a journalist.
Oh, yes, it was Institute of Directors. I was working for the Yorkshire Post financial sector with a real old hack. And they sent me off to all these amazing things. And I went to the Institute of Directors, where Gerald Ratner gave the main speech. And it was hilarious, I have to say. I mean, he got taken apart, but I went back and said, this guy has written the most fantastic. It was funny, it was very moving, and I went back and they said, write it up. So I wrote it up, and then they kind of changed it a bit, and they kind of said that Gerald Ratner calls his stuff crap.
Yes.
And I kind of went, well, you can't really. Can you say that? Anyway, they just did it, and actually I was quite mortified that my words, essentially what I'd seen, had been completely taken out of context. And I kind of saw that as the industry wasn't really what I wanted to do. I didn't really
because Ratner's business was basically ruined.
It was
on the back of, and you say that's not how you wanted the story to be portrayed. Yeah. And I guess were you the only journalist there at this time?
I was a trainee journalist at this time. So, it was packed. But, right. I mean, I don't know if there are other journalists there, but it was the IOD thing at that time. But I was the only one. It was Yorkshire United Newspapers, so they ran the stories on that. I probably should have gone into sports commentary or become a sports journalist.
It did cause him great harm.
It caused enormous harm.
He's not yet been on Talking Pints, but he has said he wants to come on Talking Pints.
Yeah.
So I'll tell him that you were on the programme.
Yes, I'm sorry. But
and is, I mean, when you reflect back on that, is journalism a bit of a grubby career?
It depends which side you go into and how you're made. It wasn't for me, that's for sure. When I saw it, I like good news. My stories are upbeat, they're funny, they make you think, and I'm much more in tune with that rather than trying to kind of find an angle perhaps that isn't necessarily there.
So maybe, as you say, cricket journalism, maybe that would have suited you, James.
Oh, yes, I would have been a wonderful commentator, but who knows?
One of my claims to fame is I have done View from the Boundary on Test Match Special with Jonathan Agnew on a Saturday lunchtime, and I'm really actually very proud of that. And I've just come back from Australia, where I've told the Aussies that in the next Ashes, we're actually going to give them a run for their money. England cricket is looking up.
It really is. It's going to be great. I think we're on a new era, a new epoch.
And that's all about leadership, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, and direction. And they've got the talent. They've had the talent for a long time.
They've just lacked the leadership.
They'd lacked the kind of purpose.
No. Yeah. Back to the Eden Chronicles. For those folk watching and listening to this that aren't familiar with them, this is a series that you've written.
Yeah, it's 7 books, and it starts off, it's all set in Yorkshire, North Yorkshire.
So how many words is that?
It is about 1 million. Yeah, and you have to keep going. The thing is, you can easily stop. You can just turn it off, and it's and then it's gone. But if it's in your DNA, you've got to carry on doing it.
And on Amazon, you've got an amazing 4-star out of 5 rating. So you've been very, very well reviewed.
Yeah.
For this series of books.
Yeah.
And I have to ask you, have you made good money out of it?
It's a struggle. I'm not gonna lie. It's very hard to make good money, but you've got to keep at it. It's like any creative career. If you're an artist, you carry on painting. You don't just give in. So yeah, it's been good times and there've been some low times.
Well, you've done very well with it. So you've got Timestamp, your new book that's out there.
Yeah.
So what is the average Monday like for a writer? What do you do on a Monday? I mean, people catch the train into London to go to work or wherever they are. What does a writer do on a Monday morning?
So I have a routine of looking after myself. I had a snapped Achilles and got very ill, so I decided to take responsibility for my own health. And I have a swimming pond, which I dug, and I go swimming pretty well every day in that, and it's pretty chilly, so does my wife. And it's stretching, breathing, and I haven't taken a paracetamol for 3 years as a result. And I've got a book coming out next year which is called The Healing Pond, which is all about my journey of building this thing which kept on falling apart, and me coming from falling apart to becoming a much better human being.
So being fit, does that make you a better writer?
Oh yeah. Oh, you've got to be fit. I mean, it's more mentally fit as well as anything. You can get it. It's very easy. It's hard because you've got to have ideas and you've got to have the flow, and it's easy to get distracted. But when you're on it, when it all comes together, you've got to be able to do it.
So when the creative juices are flowing, is that when you just sort of sit there, you can write all night? How does that work?
You just carry on going.
Because you must have bad days.
You have terrible days. Yeah, when you walk around and walk around the garden going, I don't know what to do. And then you have great days when it steams off the page. I wrote one book in 2 weeks. I wrote Timestamp in 2 years. But it took a lot of research, looking ahead and then looking back.
These mental blocks must be horrendous.
It's yeah. I think you just keep going. I think you keep going.
I know as somebody that was going out giving political speeches that some days I get up and say, right, that's what I'm going to do. I've got it. It's easy, no problem. And other days I'd be backstage, as I was being introduced, thinking, what on earth am I going to do? It's a sort of self-imposed stress, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes it's better just to write something. It's often the first sentence. If you can get the first sentence down of the day, then it's all fine. Everything seems to shove into place nicely. If you can't, and if you don't, then you can procrastinate.
An advice to people out there who are budding writers, listening to this, watching this, what should they do?
Write the first sentence. Every day, just do it. Write one sentence and then see where it goes, where it takes you. And it's easy to get rid of stuff. Just don't be afraid to delete. I cannot tell you how many chapters I've deleted. And it's worth it in the end, because if it doesn't work, it's not going to work for your reader.
So you can produce your book or your long essay or whatever it is. Isn't the toughest bit getting a publisher?
Yeah, it's extremely tough. So I actually have gone my own route. My Eden Chronicles sat around for about a year in various houses, and I decided that wasn't gonna, I just needed to get it out there. Timestamp is again, I've done it.
So self-publishing does actually work?
Oh, you get much bigger margins. It's just a lot more work. But you don't get the breadth. So I really am now looking for a new agent to get this out there, because it's getting rave reviews.
I mentioned that earlier.
And then push it around. It's getting international deals and stuff, which I cannot do. So it's a tough grind, but you've got to keep going.
So if our viewers, our listeners, want to have a go at the Eden Chronicles, where do they go? How do they find this book?
Go to Amazon. It's all there.
Just as simple as that.
Amazon, Eden Chronicles, James Erith. It's all there. Or my website. You can get the digital books from there, and timestamps on there as well.
Well, I have to say, James, you look like somebody who's found his mission in life, found his purpose in life. And
finally.
Well, no, but that's a great thing. Hey, you know what? I never thought I'd be in politics. Never, ever thought I'd go into politics, let alone media, let alone doing this. And this all came to me much later in life, too. So you never know what's around the corner, do you?
True. Keep going. Keep going what's in here.
I agree with that.
And it always helps.
Thank you for joining me on Talking Pints.
Well, thank you for having me.
OK, it's time for Barrage the Farage. I've absolutely no idea what you've sent me, so here goes. Mickey asks, what do you think needs to be done about the levels of violent street crime we now see? Mickey, it is disturbing, worrying, and I think quite frightening. And I think parents of teenagers, parents of young people, when their kids are going out on a Saturday night, are really genuinely worried about the level of violence. All we see on mainstream media are stabbings in London. You would think all the violent crime is in London. Actually, pro rata, you'll find in Birmingham and other cities like that, actually it's even worse, let alone gun crime in Liverpool or wherever else it may be. Examples, Bishopsgate. Bishopsgate in the heart of the city of London the other day at 9:45 in the morning. A masked gang break into a shop, steal things from the shop, steal watches off the arms of customers. 3 city workers intervene, try to keep the peace. All 3 get stabbed. Now, that happened to be in London, but it could have been anywhere. We have got a very, very major problem with increasing levels of crime. Violent crime in particular is what Mickey asked about. But actually, many other crimes now, we simply don't even bother to report because we know all that will happen is it gets lodged for insurance purposes. We've got real problems. Why is it happening? Well, one of my feelings is that our communities are broken down so much. I won't go in depth into why that is now, but I think government policies have a fair bit to do with it in our cities. Matt asks, can British politics be saved? It's all a complete disaster. Matt, it's often been a complete disaster. There is nothing new under the sun. I can promise you the mid-1970s, it was even worse than this. So we've been through bad periods, and then we get periods of renaissance. I think the most depressing thing about our politics right now is all of these issues that I've tried since GB News launched to identify, such as the NHS waiting list, which I thought would increase and more people would need to go private, the shortage of energy that could lead to the lights going out, the cross-channel crisis. All of these things I've pointed out, and I've done my best to try and influence and change the national debate on these things, and we get some political response to it. But the opposition party, on virtually all of these issues, have exactly the same policies. And that, to me, is the most depressing thing. We're not having proper debates about big issues. I've got time, I think, for one more. Bob says, attacking the civilian population in Ukraine is surely a war crime. Do you think Donald Trump would have put Putin in his place? Look, Bob, Donald Trump, was asked this question in my presence. He said that he told Putin if he invaded Ukraine that the architecture of Moscow would be reconfigured. And when Donald Trump says that to me, I believe that he said it. As to whether what he's done or anyone else has done is a war crime isn't the point. What we have now is a nationalist Russian leader boxed into a corner, unable to back down. And here's the thing that I find depressing. You've got the president of the USA talking about potential Armageddon, yet not once talking about any form of peace negotiation. And I do believe, however monstrous we think Putin may be, there should be, through third channels, and whether that's through a Middle Eastern country or whatever it is, we should be having conversations. Enough from me. Let's go to Mark Stein, whose show follows next.
Hey, Nigel, we're going to be picking up where you left off on that nuclear Armageddon thing, because if we're going to be dancing on the nuclear precipice, I'm not sure that Joe Biden is the tap dancer I want there. By the way, I agree entirely with Nigel, what he said at the top of the show, that if we're going to have a big coronation in May, we don't want a stripped-down, small-scale coronation. As our American friends say, go big or go home. I want huzzahs, I want lancers, I want the Queen of Tonga, I want the works at Westminster Abbey next May. We got a great show for you. We got nuclear Armageddon. We got a member of the European Parliament who caused a huge stir with a most pertinent question. We got tons of great stuff for you, and we're going to try and keep it going for the full hour unless we are interrupted by nuclear Armageddon. And if we are, you'll hear it here first. It's all coming up for you after the weather.
Hello again. We've seen wet weather move into the west of Scotland through the day, and it's turning cloudy with outbreaks of rain for many places during the next 24 hours. But the southeast largely avoids the rain. Here, high pressure holds on, at least at first. But further west, well, weather fronts are arriving from the Atlantic, They're the cause of the cloudy and damp weather in western Scotland, and that weather will push into Northern Ireland, the rest of Scotland, as well as northern and western England and Wales through the night. With the cloud thickening and those outbreaks of rain arriving, it is a mild night in the north and the west. But in central and southeastern parts of England, 5 Celsius in many places, even a touch lower in some sheltered spots. So a chilly start for